Welcome back to Built to Sell, Built to Buy. I'm your host, Sam Penny, and today we're talking with someone who's lived and breathed sales for nearly 40 years. Glenn Poulos started out as a young technical rep, and then he built two successful companies, Wave Technologies and Gap Wireless, before selling one of them in a multi-million-dollar exit. But Glenn isn't just a founder. He's a coach, he's a mentor, and the author of the book, Never Sit in the Lobby, where he shares 57 of the most practical, hard-earned sales lessons I've ever read. If you want to learn how to build deeper customer relationships, close bigger deals, and create a business your future buyer will love, this one's for you. Glenn, welcome to the show.
Hey, Sam. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Quite all right, Glenn. Now, you started sales nearly 4 decades ago. You went on to found two very successful companies. I want you to take us back to that first chapter. What really drew you into sales, and how did that early experience shape your thinking?
So, the way I always tell the story is that I'm a failed civil servant with the Canadian government. So, I was working in the electronic department of the Canadian Weather Service called Environment Canada. And my boss pulled me aside and said I wasn't cut out for government work and that I should look at a career in sales and I might be better suited to it. So, take that for what it meant. I mean, at the time, I just took him at his word. He was a really, really smart guy, and I started looking for jobs in sales. And because I was I went to technical school for electronics. I was looking for an electronic sales job, and so I made my foray out of the civil service and into the world of commission sales in 1985, and kind of never looked back from there. That's how I ended up getting started. And I mean, I can just, I can keep diving in deeper and deeper as we go along here today. So,
Yeah, definitely. Now, you've in sales, and particularly in those early days, you work the phones, you've led teams, you've delivered quotes in person only to grab 5 minutes with the customer. What was it that really shaped your thinking, and how can you share one story from your early days that really still influences how you sell today?
um, yeah. So my mantra about selling as well, just to sort of lay it out there as well, is that I want to figure out how to get, act, and stay in front of my customers, and to be a pleasure to do business with always. And and I realized early on, you know that being a pain in the ass is not a good look, right? And people don't, they don't tend to want to invite you back if you're not, agreeable. And because I always work the territory, maintaining the customer relationship under all conditions was paramount, because I might win a deal, lose a deal, the deal might get pulled away. There's a million things that can happen in a deal, and a lot of them don't include you getting the order. And you have to figure out how to behave so that when the next deal comes along, they're quite anxious to invite you back, right? And and that sunk into me very early on, because I saw people, let's just call it misbehaving when they didn't get the order, going to the big boss, complaining, crying foul, and things like that. And it would tend to cause the customer to think twice about involving that salesperson on the next deal, right? And I know that didn't exactly, answer your question about a specific deal, but was sort of one of the earliest lessons that I had learned in sales, right?
So then, yeah, you built a really successful company, which became quite a major supplier in the wireless tech space. What was the difference between being a sales rep and building a business?
So yeah, so I realized early on, when in jumping into sales, I call it kind of like a cheat code for career advancement, in the sense that when you get a job in sales, it allows you kind of like leap scotch in terms of earning potential without having a requisite, sort of 10-year career in education to go along with it, right? Like, for instance, if you want to be, a regular doctor versus a brain surgeon, there's significant difference in pay, and there's a significant difference in schooling and training, right? Where in sales, if you're good at your job, you can go in and in the first year you can make good money, and you can double it the second year if you learn how to leverage systems, processes, and solutions. And while I was learning the trade of sales in my first 5 years or so, I realized that the owners of the company, they had an elevated cheat code where they had all the salespeople working for them, including themselves. And so they not only got paid when they sold, but they got paid when I sold, right? Which is so the first thing I had learned and was that, by owning the company, you have an enhanced ability to earn money, right? Over and above just being a commission salesperson in and of itself, right?
Mm.
And but in starting the business, you realize that it's more about the entire business and not just the selling piece, right? And so and I got a lot of black eyes along the way, which I'm happy to share a few of those stories about running the business. And now looking back, I feel like I had it nailed the whole way along, but no, it was only you know uh, it takes a lifetime to gain the wisdom of a lifetime, right? In terms of how to do things correctly, build the right people, hire the right people, build the processes that are needed, and hopefully traverse the ups and downs of the business without actually going bankrupt or something, right? And so um yeah, so that was sort of the biggest difference that I had found between being the sales guy and then jumping in 1991. I jumped into my first business. Was the leverage that one would have in leveraging the team, and but also the challenges of now it's not just about sales, but it's also about marketing, it's also about finance, operations, trade, banks, insurance, many other things, right?
This is one of the things that I absolutely love because I've had 25 years of running my own companies, and you learn so much of every single aspect of the business. And one of the things that I particularly love about the research that I did before this interview was how you went from founder to author. You wrote a book called Never Sit in the Lobby, and it's a cool title because it hits on so many levels. Firstly, why did you choose that title?
So because the editor said the one I picked was awful, and so
Okay, what was that title?
it was like sales factors, how to sell. I don't know, or, something. And the lady was categorical that it was just, and it had the word factors in it for because I call it winning sales factors, right? And she was convinced me that through Amazon keyword searching and things like that, it was just not a good choice, right? And she said, you've got these great names of the chapters of the book, and one that really stood out to me was this "Never Sit in the Lobby." And she said, "That's what I think you should call the book." And I'm like, "Well, you're the editor, fine. Well, let's do that, right?" And so honestly, I did come up with the name of the chapter, but I had help coming up with the name of the book, and it's just one of the 57 tips in the book, right? And so that's how I came up with the name, and the story behind Never Sit in the Lobbies in the book. I'm happy to share it. So,
Yeah,
and
fantastic. So,
yeah.
was there a moment that that made you realize that you needed to capture your experience of sales and had to share it with the world?
Well, yeah. So the funny thing that is that way back in the 80s, I had bought this leather bound notebook, and it was kind of because I was realizing that I was getting this mentoring was going on with the four owners of the company I worked for. These guys were like really, really good natural salespeople. And they followed a set of rules, and I saw them doing a lot of things repetitively, right? Like the whole opposite of insanity kind of thing, doing the same thing over and over and wanting the same result, kind of, and so I started to write them down and credit and sort of try to come up with catchy names or titles or stories or jokes or something to go with these rules. And I kept that book. I still have the book to this day, and it's from that book of all these little rules on how to behave at all the different steps along the way and how to get, act, and stay in front of your customers, where I pulled all the information and I started sharing it with people years ago. And, a lot of times I would try to sell it, share the rules with much fanfare and humor as possible. And people are like, oh my God, you should come and share this at our sales meeting. And then people are like, oh, you should write a book. And of course I never did. And it wasn't until the pandemic when, at the time I was in Canada and we were locked down for a long time. And I thought, what better time not being able to even leave your home, right? For me to maybe buckle down and write the book. So I ended up Googling how many words do I need in order to write a business book, right? I didn't, so, this was before Chat GPT. And so I was like, how many words do I need? And it said, average business book's about 75,000 words. So I basically took all these tips and I said, and I also Googled, how do you write a book, right? And I saw this podcast, and the guy said, just get up every morning and write 500 words until the book is done, right? And so the way my workday was structured, I couldn't really do the 500 a day, but I said, you know what? I'll do 5 times 500, 2,500 on the weekend. And I'll do that every weekend without fail until the book was done, right? And that was how I did it. And I get up very early on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and I would just write until I got to around 2,500 words. And when I got 75,000 words, as I love to tell the story, I sent it to the editor. And in addition to telling me about the title, one of the editors said, Glenn, you can't say the F word that many times in a book. And I said, okay, why don't we agree? Why don't we agree on 71,000 words and we'll call it a day, right? And so that's how I sort of came up with the book, and how I came about to write it. But it was really just a list of chicken scratch little rules that I'd written over 40 years, approximately 40 years, and finally got the discipline to get it all written down in a format that, and I wanted it to be the kind of book where you could just flip it open to any page and read about a story or a rule. And they didn't necessarily require you to read the rule ahead of it or behind it in order to get something out of it, right? And so, it's not like the challenger sales model where you have to follow this huge process. And so you can flip the book to any page, read a rule, and say, oh, well, that's common sense or whatever. And I'm like, yeah, well, common sense is not always that common. Right.
And that's
And
what I really
so,
love about this book. It really reads like a field manual. It's funny, it's direct, it's practical. So, who did you write this book for, and what kind of feedback have you got from readers?
yeah. So whenever I think about the person that's reading it, I'm sort of thinking about the person, guy or gal who's kind of like 25 to 35 or whatever, just sort of going into account management, and they're trying to figure out their way through all the ways and means to be a good salesperson. And I'm really targeting, I hadn't planned that the pandemic was going to create such a problem in terms of getting in front of customers, right? And prior to that, everything was done face to face. Everything was a sales call, for the most part. There's no such thing as like Zoom selling or anything, teams calls and all that stuff, right? And but still, I still push to this day that the real solid money is the one where you're showing up to the customer and you're doing the sale, right? And so I'm appealing to the person that's showing up in the lobby, not sitting down, because we never sit in the lobby, right? And and closing deals, right? And so, and I'm imagining them saying to themselves, hey, I have this fancy, like there's chapters on it which tell you where to sit at a business meeting, at a lunch. And there's, a chapter on what to order for dinner. There's all chapters on empathy, sympathy, and compassion, and, what they mean and when to apply them, and how to do active listening, how to build genuine rapport with your customers. And again, it's all about, and I always just try to say it in the simplest of terms, just not being that pain in the ass sales guy, right? And there's like simple little rules about, one of them, which I love, is always show up with something in your hand and something in your mind. And
Explain
and
that.
people are like, yeah. And so I just learned a long time ago that, one, of course, I never sit in the lobby. And the reason I don't sit in the lobby is because I got caught numerous times being distracted, and it was a bad look, right? Like the guy would come out and he'd say, oh, are you Glenn? And I was all like engaged in something, right? Or, you could be Worst thing is using the lobby phone, trying to call your next guy, and the guy comes out, and how do you hang up on the guy on the phone? Or it's really, really bad look, right? And so I realized the best thing is just to be standing at attention, not distracted, not on your phone, waiting, and just show up a couple of minutes early. And then when the person walks out, have something to give them and something to tell them, right? Something in your hand, something in your mind. It might be the reason that you got the appointment with them. For instance, they might have asked for literature, a quote, some kind of documentation or something like that, which is why one of the other main rules at the beginning of the book is never fax the facts or ship the shit, right? And the reason why is because those are all golden opportunities to show up in the lobby and not sit down and have something in your hand, which is the literature they asked for, the quote, right? And something in your mind, which is, hey, I wanted to get your first side, here's the information. I just wanted to point you at some important stuff and draw your attention to it. Or maybe you're just dropping off a new Stanley water mug that you're giving your good clients, right? And yeah, again, that's what's in your hand. There's pens, mouse pads, water bottles, all the litany of stuff we give away to customers, right? But always have something in your hand and always something to talk to them about, right? So there's no right. And then of course the one of the absolute golden rules is always ask for a mini tour. And I stress this so much, which is you want to get behind the veil, right? Behind the Wizard of Oz curtain, because you need to see how the business runs, right? And so you ask for a mini tour. And the people are like, what's a mini tour, right? Like, why do you call it a mini tour, right? I'm like, because tours take all friggin' day, right? Like nobody wants to go on a tour. And so by saying mini tour, you're saying, because if there's any hesitation, you say, just a quick look around. I just want to see where you're going to use my software, my service, my hardware, my whatever it is you sell. You want to find the situation where it's being used, because by getting behind the veil, you're going to be learning about whatever competitors are in play or not in play, and you're going to be walking by all sorts of other departments and things where you might, because if you're a broad salesperson selling a broad range of products, you might say, oh my god, I didn't even realize they bought those kinds of things, and I hadn't even been chasing them for that, because they never got past the lobby and they're buying it from your competitor, right? And so that's why you want to get in behind the door for a quick tour. See, don't make a nuisance of yourself, but you're all the while, you're looking for, how you fit in. Am I, is it a level playing field? Is there a competition? You never got fired for buying IBM account and it's all IBM, and you're not getting the order. You're just there to keep IBM honest. Um, and, and then once you're back there, you can make out lots of other maneuvers. Like for instance, you might say, hey, I didn't realize that you use a similar product that we sell in this other department. you know who's the boss in charge of that, right? And oh, that's Jack or whatever. Oh, well, would you mind me taking me by Jack's desk so I can drop my card off on the way out the door? And hopefully he will do it, and a lot of times they will. And you can give Jack the card, and if you're lucky, you can say, hey, got 2 minutes, and then and Jack say, you know what, I'll walk him out, right? And so the other guy leaves. Now you're in front of Jack. And and a lot of times what I'm doing is, while I'm in there, I'm making future appointments, whether it's a week from now, a month from now, or 6 months from now. And the and it helps me to build a perpetual prospecting system, right? And the other thing, that again, and it's obviously it's in the book, is you never forget a face, right? While you're behind the veil, when you were not sitting in the lobby and you were there 15 minutes early, you were in your car sitting down, and that's when you whip out your phone and you go through and you go back through every person you've ever met at that account, and you bring their face back to the front of your memory from the back of your memory, right? Because if you said you've been at it 25 years, you know what it's like pulling faces from your
The
long-term memory,
vault.
right? And that hesitation when Sally walks down the hall and you know her name but you can't get it, and she's like, hey Glenn, and you're like, hey Sally, right? That's a super bad look. And guess what? Sally is hurt. She's crushed by that, right? Because she remembered your name, you didn't remember hers. But when you're walking down the hall and you're like, "Hey, Sally, good to see you," blah blah blah. How's this? How's that? And you've refreshed your frame on everything you know about Sally while you were in your car, waiting to move to the lobby and not sit down so you could ask for a mini tour. guess you just wanted to see what was behind the veil, etc. You know, again, you're just portraying what's a good look, right? And so that's why never forget a face, another golden rule, you know?
So many great little pockets of gold here, Glenn, and I'm sure there's going to be a lot more in this conversation. One of the things about salespeople is that most people think of them as really slick, greasy, pushy, but you've got this mantra of always being a pleasure to do business with. How does that show up in practical terms?
Yeah. So, you know, I spend a fair bit of time going on about building genuine rapport, right? And that's through, one of my golden rules is God gave you two ears and one mouth, so you do the math kind of thing, right? You should be listening twice as much as you're talking, and you don't want to imply familiarity, right? I have another chapter called implied familiarity also breeds contempt, right? Which is it builds on the story of where, if you've ever gotten a car for a weekend and driven with four guys across some state or province or what have you, and by the time you get back you want to kill the guys because you've been arm in arm, you've been hyper familiarized to them, you know what I mean? Like, you know what they smell
Yeah.
like, you know what they sound like. I think you understand what I'm trying to say, right? That's where the saying familiarity breeds contempt comes from, right? And that's why we all go home to our own homes every night, right? We don't live with each other. And I realized that there's a thing called implied familiarity where these sales guys come in and they're like, oh, we should go golfing, and like, and you just met them and like, I don't like golfing, I don't golf, like, so why would I go golfing with you, right? Like, so not only, like, it's just so misplaced, right? And so, you want to be building, always trying to build rapport in a genuine manner. And, and so, that's how, and these are all the ways I try to build up not being, like, to try to be a pleasure to do business with, in other words, right? So,
Yeah. Glenn, you're a big believer of face to face interactions. And obviously, the modern world, and because of the pandemic, we've really retreated behind the computer screen into a world of virtual meetings and Zooms and email. Uh, how do salespeople today, and also founders, how do they apply the principles of a face to face interaction?
I love this question, and usually it comes at me in a slightly different angle. It's more, people are challenging me that it can all be done over Zoom, right? And a lot of things can be done over Zoom, and I agree, right? But the I don't know if you've ever seen on Instagram or Facebook any of the video clips by Grant Cardone, and so many of them are on his jet, right? And and it's got the GQ on it and all, or the GC, I should say. And so when Grant bought that plane, do you think the guy that sold him and got the $50 million order for the plane sent him a video link to a Zoom call, and he picked him up on a video call, and he said, "Hey, Grant, hop in this limousine, and we're going to virtually drive you to the airport, and I'm going to introduce you to the flight crew. I'm going to introduce you to the pilot and the co-pilot, and we're going to virtually fly you from Miami, where your office is, to New York for a lunch, right? And then the pilot's going to fly to Miami, and the stewardesses or flight attendants, whatever, are going to fly to Miami. You're not. You're going to stay home, and we're going to go to New York, have lunch, fly back, and when we get there, you're going to send me a check for $50 million for a plane." And I do that to make it the most, craziest example, to show that if you had $50 million and you were buying a plane, there's absolutely categorically no way in the world you would ever buy it without going for a test drive. Correct?
Hmm. Yeah.
So my attitude is, and the guy that gives you the best test drive is the one that gets the order, and it's the same whether it's a $5 million item, 500K, 50K, or 5K. It all holds true throughout the whole. Now there are products that, like, software as a service and things like that, but I can assure you that if you're selling $1 million SaaS systems, the guy who got the order has definitely visited the customer, because he needed to get behind the veil, because he needed to find out who the competition was. He needed to find out if they had the funding and the resources and the support, and before they would go through all these other hoops and things and what have you, right? And so you need to realize that there are some things you can do virtually and some things you can't. and that the real winners are the ones that get behind the door and they get in and they figure out who the people are, who they need to talk to, you know. And there's so many things you're not going to find out from Zoom. Like, you're not going to be able to say to the guy on Zoom, hey, could you like take the camera and zoom around your office so I can look at the swag that all my competitors have sent you so that I can figure out who my competition is? Because they're just going to say, no, we don't discuss competitors, right? So you'd have no idea who you're competing with, right? Like, it's, you have to get, so now, again, people that are in a hyper virtualized world will argue to the end, but again, most of the people that I'm talking to about selling are selling things that are have a real world aspect to them, and eventually someone needs to visit the customer, right?
So then, how would this practically show up if someone's doing, say, a $5,000 sale, to a client that's across the country? What's a practical tip for them to be able to sell that?
So so you want to be able to get as close to the client as possible. So if you're in New York and you're selling $5,000, you know, widgets and what have you have one office, you don't have a guy in Portland or whatever, and the customers in Portland, then clearly you're not going to get on a plane and fly to Portland for a $5,000 sale, right? And so, it then, in that case, then yes, if you don't have local representation that can visit the customer, like local reps or whatever it is, then you will need to do your best via some kind of a virtual methodology or what have you, right? But then you need to structure the manner in which you do it, right? You need to be able to give the best possible virtual presentations. I have a technique I shared on my website called the punch perfect pitch and close, on how you figure out what the customer's looking for, and the way like I said, I call it the punch perfect pitch and close, right? It's how you structure a presentation, whether in person or virtually, in order to best present your product, and try to get an order, right? But yeah, like, I mean, you can't be in Portland if there's only 5 grand on the table, because there's not enough money to pay for the flight, right? And so, you know, but yeah, but I mean, that's not a lot of times that's not really the person that I'm talking to. I'm talking to the guy who's selling $5,000 item, but there's 50 copies of it, or something like that, right? Or someone's managing a territory and they visit their territory on a regular basis. So then it's a matter of scheduling, time management, and make sure you're always, moving around your territory in a logical manner, and you visit them when it's appropriate, right?
So clearly, these strategies, it's more than just the tactics. It's more of a philosophy. You say freedom begins with no, and that's certainly not something that we hear in sales a lot. So why is that important?
Yeah. The concept of freedom begins with no is, it boils down to, a lot of times, for lack of a better term, kind of weak salespeople won't have the resilience or the state of mind or presence of mind or whatever to be strong when it's necessary. So, for instance, they've done everything right. They visited the customer to the best of their ability, whether it's virtually or in person. They've done everything right. The customer's ready to go. You've given them the final proposal, and really, you're there to pick up a signed document. And the guy's like, "Oh, I need another 3%," right? And it's sort of, so the example is kind of, the guy that does it wrong would say, "Oh, okay, well, maybe let me talk to my manager," and gets back in his car, drives an hour and a half back to the office, and knowing he's going to get in crap from the boss for not, whereas, and so the moment he says anything other than no, all the work shifts onto him, right? All the worry is on him, all the stress is on him, all the effort is on him. He has to talk to the boss, and he's got to go back and tell the guy no. And he should have just said, well, we talked about price prior. We negotiated you a slot in production, starting next week or next month or whatever. You wanted 8-week lead time. We need to hit our number. If you want to hit your start date of 8 weeks from now, you know, I'm going to need an order by today or tomorrow at the latest. And, we've already led with our best price. We don't have any more room to move on price. So if you want to meet your delivery commitments, you want us to meet our delivery commitments, we're needing to get an order out of you today. So hence you're saying no, right? And so the way I try to get people to think about it is like, when, think about when you were younger and you're a teenager, and people would say like, hey, do you want to go to the movies? And you're like, no, I can't. And they're like, why? And you're like, well, because I can't afford it. Right. And so in the town I come from, like, I can't afford it that's a full sentence, right? Like, that's a full, like, nothing else. Like, when you say I can't afford it, that means I'm not coming. Right. Like, don't bug me. And so that's what I mean by the no, right? It's no is a full sentence. And so everything changes when you give the maybes and yeses and I'll tries and things like that. Right. And so you should be prepared for it. You should have done all of the homework up front so that you're able to say no, in a responsible way, but yeah. But I mean, if you kept 3% in your pocket and the guy asks you for the 3%, well, you can give it to him at that point, right? And then he says, well, what about free shipping? And you're like, well, no, I can't. I mean, the 3% was all I had. I'm up against the wall. If you want to hit your delivery commitments, I'm going to need to get an order from you, right? Like, eventually you have to learn how to say no, right?
Yeah, fantastic. Now, another a great little saying that popped up during all of my research prior to this was, "You've got this phrase, and I love it. Thank God it's broken." how do you how do you learn to see customers' problems and build a relationship from that?
So counterintuitively, something breaking is the number one way to build the best possible customer relationship. And it's not for the weak it's not for the lazy or the weak minded person, right? Because most people are like, it breaks and they say, oh, we'll call customer service, right? I'm exact opposite. I'm like, if it breaks, call me, right? Because they don't remember you for buying it from you. They remember what you do when it breaks, right? And how you treated them when the pistons weren't lining up, or something was cracked or broken or chipped, or didn't start, or didn't work, or the the throughput wasn't there, or whatever. And a lot of people are like, oh, well, and they shirk responsibility, which sends a huge message to the customer that you don't care. Whereas when you snatch that phone out of the cradle and you say, "Oh my God, the pistons are broken," or whatever, let me get my mechanic on that right away, and you baby them through it, and you know in an over the top manner, and they feel comfortable every time there's an issue calling you, and eventually over time, you have to kind of like, you don't want to be like, you don't want it to be abusive of people's time, right? Like, maybe it's inappropriate the way they're doing it, but you can train them in a gentle manner, right? But they know they can always call you when there's a problem, and you will be there to answer the phone for them, right? And an example of that was at my last company, Gap Wireless. If you went 00000 on the phone, like, if you've ever called somewhere and the first thing you do is go 00000, you just pound on it, right? Instead of like, one for customer service, two for this, three for that, right? And it it would immediately send the phone call to me, and I would take the call, right? And 99 times out of 100, I would be able to snatch the phone and grab it, and, oh, blah blah blah. You got this, that, and the other thing, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm the owner of the company. I can see if I can help you, right? And they're like, I got the owner, and I'm like, you hit 00000, that's what you get, right? And they're like, oh wow, that's incredible, right? That's never happened before. And so, that's another one of the ways of being a pleasure to do business with, right? Answering the phone, being there, not this perpetual voicemail, and nowadays, this AI shenanigans of, AI solving all your problems, and at the end, you still don't know how to make your software talk to your printer or whatever, right?
So let's talk about a world of automation, particularly in sales, and sales people are relying too much on this aspect of it. What is it as salespeople we need to relearn so that we're not just going through the processes of automation, automating emails, automating every other aspect of the process?
Yeah, so I just challenge everyone to look at it like a fine art, right? Like, um, in the sense that there's tools and techniques and things that you can use in order to be more productive. But if you don't have the or a music production or whatever, there's all sorts of electronic gizmos and gadgets. But if you don't have any musical talent, you're still going to have a lousy song at the end of it, right? And so I challenge everyone to use the tools to improve your productivity, but not to replace your productivity, right? And so I use it all day long for all sorts of things. Analyzing bid boards so we can find more opportunities to quote on, and then helping us to structure our RFPs and respond in a more timely manner by filling out a lot of the boilerplate and taking care of all that for me. Analyzing contracts for, the 9 or 10 key points I would need to look at rather than having to read a 100-page document, and which is mainly boilerplate for the most part, right? Instead of coming up with 2 or 3 ideas for new product promotion, AI can help you come up with 10, and then you can curate the 10 down to what you think is the most appropriate. But again, you're sort of using it as as heavy machinery, allowing you to do more, but not in place of you, but helping you. You're still the curator of it all, right? And that's where a lot of people just want to go, oh, like, write me an email that says da da da, and they cut and paste. And I don't recommend that. I would never recommend that to anyone, right? But you could get it to craft an email for you, and then but then you have to reread it. You have to make sure that it's appropriate, eh, you know, and
I think
so
it's always important to have a last human touch on everything that goes out,
exactly,
whether
yeah,
it's a quote, whether it's the email, any piece of automation. Now,
yeah.
Glenn, uh, you haven't just sold products, you've also sold your company, Gap Wireless. What did you do early on that really made it attractive to potential buyers?
So, yeah, so I learned a lot. I sold 2 businesses, right? And one was Wave, which I sold, and then I started Gap Wireless, and Gap Wireless sold in 2022. Um, Gap Wireless sold as a I often explain to people, as a very well run, like a sewing machine, right? Like our Swiss watch. It was, all things were in place and all systems and processes were defined. Due diligence went very, very smoothly. But I learned in the end that actually the that didn't work 100% to our favor, right? Like, I thought, oh, well, we needed our ERP in a perfect manner. We needed to be able to deliver them 6 binders of perfection and then pick up a check, right? But the reality is that for the private equity companies and people like that buying businesses, they want to come in and they want some rough around the edges things that they can put a bit of polish on and get quick indications of an increase in the value. And so they'll often pay you more for that, right? Or more for less, if I can say it in that way. And so, you know, but the one thing, that's super important when you're selling your business is you need 3 good years, because most companies are going to evaluate you on your last 3 years performance. And so every time you have a lousy year, you kind of reset the benchmark of when you can sell your company. And you might be able to convince them to look the other way because of an anomaly or something like that, but more often than not, they don't. And so, I learned from the first business. They looked at the last 3 years times the EBITDA multipliers, et cetera. It was the same with Gap Wireless. And again, so like I said, I wanted it to be as polished as possible, but I should have left the shine off some of it, because I think I would have actually done a little bit better. And it proved that proved to be true when they bought other businesses after ours. And I saw that the guys were getting slightly better multiples. And I asked why. And they're like, well, because you have a Swiss watch. And when we apply your Swiss watch on their Timex, right, we're going to get a multiplier in terms of the valuation on that business. And so in a way, it's worth more, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, wait a minute, I spent $2 million on an ERP. No, I didn't, it wasn't 2 million, but but I spent 2 million on an ERP so he could get the multiple, right? Like, it doesn't make sense. But, and again, I'm not the M&A guy, but there's a lot of what I'm saying that you want to leave these areas where they can go in and make these quick changes and get these boosts, because that's what drives private equity, right?
You speak about the Swiss Army knife, so you're clearly big on systems and processes, but also creating teams so that you're not personally involved. Uh, how does your thinking revolve around building teams where you're not stuck in the weeds day to day?
Right. So, and I mean, I really have to call attention to programs like EOS and similar programs. EOS, the Entrepreneurial Operating System, but there's many other ones they're out there. But that's kind of where I got my start, and I realized the magic in structure first, people second, right, and process over people, and then right person in the right seat. So you find the process, you find the structure, then you assign the people, not the other way around. And the mistakes I made and others make are they kind of take the people and they assign them randomly to processes and procedures, but it's not the right person in the right seat. And you really need to set up what you need to in order to run your business, then figure out what staff is needed, look at the staff available, and apply those people to the processes you have, or recruit for the missing links that you don't have, right? And so this was and now it just comes naturally to me. It's just like it's just part of my DNA in everything that I do. Structure first, people second, right? And you need proper finance, you need proper operations, you need proper sales, proper marketing. And am I the right person? Is that the right person? Do I have the right person? Yes, no, no, fine. We got to recruit for it then, right?
Was there a moment where you realized that this company can run without me? And how did that feel?
Well, actually, so to me, like that's the perfection, right? Like that's I don't have the right word. I wish I could
The
come up with a
golden
really good
egg.
word for it, but yeah, like the unicorn moment, right? Where it's perfect. You kind of come to work and don't have to do anything, but everyone thinks you're doing everything, right? And because and so and Gap Wireless, which was sold and they changed the name and whatever, and now I've moved on and doing something new. But I mean, um, I had gotten it to the point where there was really good people at the head of each one of the process, ops, finance, marketing, et cetera, right? But they all needed me. Like they didn't need me for the 90% of their day, but there are times where they needed me. So and it wasn't like I was off in the Bahamas, like on the beach. I still went to work every day, but I didn't have to do that much work, right? Because I was just answering questions and making decisions that were above their authority level or appropriateness, and what have you, right? And so I was acting as the integrator, if you're familiar with EOS, right? Um, and so the and also had to be provide vision, big thinking, work on big deals, big decisions, things like that, right? And so when you can get the right person in the right seat at the top of each one of those, it's perfection. And there's no better way of doing it, because you can go away for a week on holidays and realize that you don't actually need to be there most of the day. You just feel better when you're there, right? And because hey, if they need if they need you to approve a $100,000 investment or something, you can do that from pretty much anywhere, right? But
You speak a lot at sales vessels, podcasts, workshops. What kind of stories or rules really get the biggest reaction from the audience?
yeah, some of the ones that are like really controversial, which have like they have message, like there's a few stories in the book where the salespeople acted, we'll say, untoward in a way, and people are like, that doesn't sound like kosher, especially now in this like very prim and proper sort of world we live in these days. But it was where we stormed out of a customer site once, right, and refused to sell to them. We said, "I refuse to sell to you," and the yeah, and so these some of those are some of the stories that really resonated the most. $10 million in diamonds is one as well, where but sorry, just to back up, I don't want to leave a thought hanging, but the one where we left the company was we didn't actually get out the door because we were demonstrating an instrument. The guy was rude to us. He clearly had IBM underwear on, as we used to say, right? And it's like, I don't know why you've invited us here. Maybe you want to keep the competitor honest, whatever it is, but we're not wasting valuable time. We brought extra people here to show this to you. And my coworker grabbed the power cord from like 4 feet away from the wall, ripped it out of the wall, and he said, "I refuse to sell to you." He says, "Glenn, pack it up. Let's go. We're leaving." And to make a long story short, the guy apologized. We explained to him the way he was being. He recognized it and he agreed, and he ended up buying a multiple of units of the unit we were selling because it was appropriate and we were there for an appropriate reason. And he bought, and it ended up being an amazing sale. And the lesson is you got to value your own time and your own, you have to place a high value on yourself as well as the customer, right? The customer can always be right or whatever, but he can't treat you wrong, right? Like, and so, and then another story that resonates really well is $10 million in diamonds, where I used to work in a jewelry store as a teenager. And 10 years later, I went back the guy I worked for had opened his own store, and I went to the store to say hello. And it was this Italian guy who had polio as a child, and he was a very affected man. Like he was in a wheelchair, and but he had this over the top personality, it's heavy Italian accent. Believe it or not, he was the crazy lazy ladies man or whatever, and people just loved him, right? And and I went into him and I said, "Oh, is Romeo here?" And she said, "Oh yeah, he's in the back. Let me get him for you, Glenn. He'll really like to see you." And so he comes wheeling out, right? I'm like, "Oh, Romeo, how's it going?" He's going, "Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing." And I'm like, how's business? He goes, "Oh my God, you never believe it." He goes, "I could be selling, the $10 million in diamonds, but I'm so busy in the back fixing watches." Right. And I'm like, what? Why don't you just hire a watchmaker and come up front? But he was so busy in being a watchmaker, which is what he learned 40 years ago, that he couldn't get past it to sell the diamonds, right? And so that became a saying which resonates through my entire 40 years of selling, which was, $10 million in diamonds, right?
I
Like
love that analogy.
don't get stuck fixing watches when you could be selling diamonds, right? And
Yeah.
yeah.
You do a lot of coaching of reps, execs, founders. What is one common mistake that you see across the board?
The biggest thing I help people with is because most of my coaching is done in a collaborative sort of quid pro quo kind of manner. Like I have my own a new business I bought in Florida, which is why I've moved to Florida. I've got a U.S. visa. I'm living here now, and so I have a day job, right? And I'm redoing. I'm on Glenn 3.0, right? And but I spend a lot of time with executives in my cohorts, like in entrepreneurial workshops and cohort groups and like EO and PEO and things like that, right? And I share myself liberally and generously with them. And mostly where I'm helping them is in the area of like sales structure and management structure and compensation and benefits and things like that. And that's where I find the misalignment is the greatest, that the compensation never lines up with the company goals. And the company's hitting its goals, and the people are not being rewarded for it, or the people are being rewarded and the company are not hitting their goals, right? And so an area where I've learned a lot over the years just through trial and error and examples and what works and what doesn't work is on how to structure results-based compensation and things like that. And so that's the majority of the kind of coaching that I do. And I'm usually, again, I'm not really charging for this. It's something I'm more trading for other executive knowledge compensation, if I could say it that way. I'm arbitrage, or not arbitrage, but bartering, and I'm just paying it forward.
Your book, Never Sit in the Lobby, is packed with 57 pieces of gold. And they're just really rules to live by, particularly for a rookie rep. Now, if you had to pick any three of those 57, what would they be and why?
So some of the ones, that the golden ones that are that we've already talked about, like freedom begins with no. But ones we haven't talked about, like they're all little favorites for me, to be honest. Like, so it's hard. I don't like being disingenuous, right? So like I don't have like three, and I don't have like three ready to go that are my favorites, or because I actually love them all. And so, but the ones that I've shared are really important. Some other ones, that haven't come up yet is greed-based learning, right? WSP, show them the WSP, which is the winning sales presence. And then anything around the active listening and the rapport, I find people really need to, that's a huge area of is, like learning to listen, right? And actively listen, and there's exercises in the book on how to do it. And, you know, and so, yeah, so rapport, um, yeah, like I said, WSP, greed based learning, which I call GBL. And, yeah, those are some of the three that I haven't sort of come up yet that are favorites. So,
I want to touch on AI now because AI is really
okay.
changing so much. Sales, marketing, finance, every aspect of a business is being affected now. Where do you think human connection still has the edge?
Well, the human connection has the edge when you're communicating, like when you're talking to someone instead of talking to an AI, right? Like, because I've found that there's certain mundane things where AI can be very functional and work well, but the last mile, which is the real, like I often tell people try to learn the difference between sales and marketing and which one you're better at and do that, right? Because like sales is when you're in front of customer closing the deal, doing the presentation, you're kind of the guy on stage performing the play. Everything else is marketing, right? Getting you in front of the customer, right? And so AI is really amazing at coming up with ways of doing that, but it's not going to relate to it's not going to relate to the customer. It's not going to be able to, at least not at this point, understand the micro the word escapes me, but when their face changes slightly and you could tell you're off base or you're on target, and things like that you need a human for. So that last mile of the selling has to always be done by humans, but getting more at bats, that's where the AI really helps you, right?
So before we wrap up, Glenn, and throwing this back to the listener, whether they're a founder, whether they're in sales, whichever function they're in, what do you think would be three things that someone really needs to start implementing this week to sell more widgets, more software, whatever it is?
So, yeah. So, and now now I have to like remember like 57 different things from the book, right? I've already pulled 21 of them out of my head, right? So I don't actually have it sitting here, but the the really the most important thing that I always want to share at the end with people is the master golden rule, which I feel it's a one off, but it's worth three of everything. And if I can think of a couple more at the end, I'll gladly give them to you. But and again, like you can see, I'm just trying to be blatantly honest, et cetera, right? But there's a golden chapter called "You Only Get Forever to Make Another Impression," and it's the key. It's the cheat code to you building your career. And I've used it my entire career since college, all the way up to where I'm at today, every step along the way. And I've watched myself use it to allow other people's career to get built as well. And what it is like, people are like, what do you mean? You'd only get forever to make another impression, right? I thought it was you got to make a good first impression. I'm like, yeah, that's what my mom taught me, and she was right. But I said, but you have to understand, like in the world of business and career building and whatever, like every impression is a first impression, right? And so what you need to curate your career like it's a like it's a museum. You know what I mean? Like you're putting the best museum in the planet together, and like everything that you're doing is has a measure of specificity to it and deliberateness to it, right? So examples, right? When you hear the boss walk in the office and you hear their footsteps, right? Immediately switch from whatever you're doing to being in hyper the best employee they've ever met mode. Right. And some people that say that sounds disingenuous or whatever. It's like, no, it's just like, don't be on your phone. Right. When the boss walks by, say, hey boss, I got this deal I'm working on. It could be really good. Can I get 2 seconds of your time? Right. And the other nine guys in the room aren't doing it. Right. And so the thing is, what happens over time is it builds it builds a bank of memories inside, right? Of impressions that you've built. When you're at a trade show, most people, they that's where they fail miserably, right? Their feet get sore, they sit down, they start mucking about on their phone, they want to constantly leave the booth. I'm like, no, when you're at the trade show, you're either talking to a customer in the aisle, pulling customers into the booth, and if there's no customers walking by, you're figuring out who the head of whatever departments are at the show, whoever you've brought from head office. You're meeting each one of them individually and asking them to give you a career lesson in their particular, maybe there's like 6 product managers. You want to talk to all 6 product managers. You want each one of them to tell you the cheat codes to each one of their product lines and what makes it. And at the end, and you want to arrive early, you want to help them set up the booth, you want to stay late and help them tear down the booth. And, you don't want to be wandering away for hours on end. Oh, where's Glenn? Oh, he took off again. You don't want to be leaving early. And over time, I was always say, when it comes time to pick the regional manager for Western region, your name pops up immediately. The other names wash away to the side, right? And so you want to make sure that you figure out, where do you want to go? I want to go from the warehouse to CEO. Then you just need to figure out who you need to kill along the way, right? And you need to make sure you outperform each guy or gal that's in your way on your way from the warehouse to the CEO. And there's plenty of guys and plenty of examples on the stock exchange of where men, women have gone from the warehouse floor driving a tow motor to being the CEO of a company. And they did it by making every impression a lasting impression.
Great pocket of gold, Glenn, to finish with. Glenn, this has been packed with gold. From never sit in the lobby to becoming the kind of salesperson and also founder that customers actually want to buy from. You've given us a real masterclass in what real selling looks like. Now, Glenn, before we wrap, for anyone listening who wants to learn more from you, get your book, or maybe even bring you in to speak, where's the best place for them to go?
They can go to my name, glennpoulos.com, and all the connection points are there. But if they, more easier ways, go to LinkedIn, connect with me there, and I'm on LinkedIn every day. I'm a top voice on LinkedIn. I post every day and super active on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way to get a hold of me.
Absolutely fantastic. And I'll make sure I include those links in the show notes. And if this episode gave you a fresh perspective on sales or just reminded you of the power of showing up well and often, please pass it on. Share it with a founder, a rep, or a leader who wants to build a business worth buying. I'm Sam Penny, and this is Built to Sell, Built to Buy. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.